Okay, let's talk about conditionals, if statements, and functions. So I'll start with conditionals because I can't really teach functions or if statements without conditions. So I don't know if conditionals is the right term or just conditions, but here's what they are. In parentheses, you don't need it, but in other programming languages you would, and it also makes it more obvious what you're trying to do. So 10 smaller than 5. Okay, that's basically a question. That's basically what this is. It's kind of like a question, and it's basically asking, is 10 smaller than 5? That's basically a question, and the answer is no. So this will be equal to false, because 10 is not smaller than 5. 10 is bigger than 5. So this is false. And you have a few things you can use for conditions. You can use smaller than. Is 10 smaller than 5? Notice it, 10 is bigger. You can use bigger than. Is 10 bigger than 5? Yes, it is. You can use is equal to. And what else can you use? Uh, it seems like I forgot things because that seems pretty simple. Is that all that programs are made out of? I'm starting to think that yes, because I can't think of anything else. So either they're equal to, either they're smaller than something else, or bigger than something else. So, well, I guess it can be true or false. In GameMaker, it doesn't make a difference because true actually means 1 and false means 0. That's not entirely true. Um, any number any number bigger than 0.5 is true. Okay? Any number bigger than 0.5 is true. Any number smaller than, than 0.5 is false. That's in GameMaker only. In other programming languages, sometimes the only thing that is true is 1 and anything else is false. Sometimes that's not how it works, but in GameMaker, anything that is bigger than 0.5 is true. So yeah, that's all you need to remember for that. And true is actually 1 and false is actually 0. The actual true and false are basically variables, more specifically constant variables or just constant. So I guess that's something I forgot to mention in my variables video. They're constants. So that means they never change. You can't change them. You can't say true equals 5. You can't assign 5 to true. It won't work because true is a constant. So constant, it's a variable that is constantly the same. Never changes. So yeah, true is equal to 1, false is equal to 0. But anything bigger than 0.5 will also be considered to be true. So yeah, okay. So those are the 5 building blocks, I guess, for conditionals. Now what can you use that for? Well, everything. Without it, you wouldn't really have a program, I guess. Well, you could, but it wouldn't be a very fancy program. Yeah, okay. So maybe you. So what's an if statement then? I just told you what a condition is. I forgot that. Well, okay. I need to make a note for myself. Oops. I need to remember to teach those two things. Okay. If 5 is smaller than 10, uh, happiness is equal to 0. My biggest wish, my biggest desire is for 5 to be bigger than 10. sorry, for 5 to be smaller than 10. If 5 is smaller than 10, then my happiness will become super high. Okay? 5 is smaller than 10. So after this, happiness will be equal to this huge number. So I'll be so happy that I won't be able to do anything else outside of thinking about my happiness. That's a weird example, but it's the first one I thought about. So that's for a condition. Is 5 smaller than 10? Nope. So this will be completely ignored. The program won't read this, it will be completely ignored. So that means it won't take processing power, it won't make the game slower. If statements take a little bit of processing but barely anything, so it's basically as if there was nothing there. So, and that's how you save processing power if you need to do a lot of conditional checkings. You take the condition that is going to be false most of the time and you put it first. So, yeah, so you avoid processing time. So, anything that can be false, check for that first and then check for the other things that are more likely to be true. Um, yeah, okay, let's talk about these now. If 5 is smaller than 10, or, this means or, these two bars, if you can't access them on your keyboard, you can use or like this in GameMaker and it will work. But in other programming languages, you couldn't. So people are going to say that it's better or more appropriate to use these. Um, I say do whatever you want. If the program works, then it works. But I do think it's better to use it this way. It's going to make it easier to change programming languages later if you want to. Okay, so if 5 is more than 10, or 10, or, sorry, or 5 is bigger than 10, happiness equals this huge number. So this code will always run. This will basically be useless because you're checking two things that you know either one or the other is going to be true. So that's actually a useless if statement. And sometimes you're gonna do this by mistake. You're gonna think that two things are different, but they basically cancel each other out. So if you have a bug in your code, that might be the reason. But yeah, that's a condition. Now we have two possibilities. Or maybe 10 divided by 2 equals 5. You could have this. Oops. It would work anyway, just because of the way it's read, but usually if you have complex calculations for conditions, it's a good idea to put it in parentheses so that it's basically read first by the program. So if you have additions and multiplications, this is going to be read before anything else if you multiply it by 2. Anyway, if you want things to be clearer, parentheses help. So that's the or. Let's have two possible conditions. Then you can have another one, which is and. This means and. And I know that you can write this with your keyboard, but I'll still tell you what else you can do. You can write it this way if you want. But again, it's a good practice to do this just because if you change languages, that's what they're going to be using most of the time. So, okay, and 10 equals 5. So obviously this is never going to work. It's going to be false. But if 10 was equal to 5 and 5 was smaller than 10, obviously that's nonsense. You can't have these two statements to be true. You can't have A be smaller than B and A be equal to B. That can't happen. But just an example, so you will need these two things to be true for this to happen. Because these two things can never be true at the same time, again, I would never be happy. My desires would never become real. I guess. So that's for the and. And there's something important to know about this. If you want things to run smoothly, this is going to be read first, and if this is false, this will be ignored. So again, make the conditions more likely to be false, put them in the beginning. If you know for sure that a condition is more likely to be false than the others, put it at the beginning, and yeah, it's going to save some processing power, but also it can be a nice trick to use when you want to put everything in one line instead of multiple lines. Sometimes the first condition needs to be true for you to be able to check the rest. So for example, if um, instance exists enemy or object enemy and object enemy dot x is smaller than x, this will work because if there are no instances of the enemy object, this won't be read at all, so you won't have a bug. But if this were to be first, or let's say you were just checking for this, if there's no enemies, the game's going to crash. It's going to say, oops, there's no enemy. You tried to access a variable that doesn't exist. You tried to access an instance that doesn't exist. So, yeah, so you can use that for this. If you don't understand what I just said, don't worry about it, but you might remember it later, and if you do, you'll find it useful. If not, it doesn't matter. You can ignore it. Uh, but yeah, so these are for conditions and if statements. So, okay. I'll actually stop the video there and put the function video afterwards. So see you right now.